I'm Heidi Bashrode, Executive Director of Women's Voices Now, and I feel so honored and privileged to be joined by Ava Homa, who is a member of our advisory board at Women's Voices Now. She's also an acclaimed novelist, dedicated human rights activist, and resilient storyteller. Her debut novel, Daughters of Smoke and Fire, which I recommend everyone to read, has captivated readers and critics alike, earning her the esteemed 2020 Silver Nautilus Award for Fiction and placing her as a finalist for the 2022 William Soroyan Writing Prize. Ava's articles have appeared in pages of esteemed publications, including The Globe and Mail, the BBC, Toronto Star, Literary Hub, and Literary Review of Canada. She holds a master's degree in creative writing from the University of Windsor in Canada. And since 2022, Ava has been a faculty member at California State University, Monterey Bay, where she teaches students the craft and art of writing. And they are very, very fortunate to have such an incredible, talented storyteller such as yourself, Ava, teaching them. And today, our topic is a very underreported in mainstream media discussion as we see in the world a couple years ago, the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Just today, I think it's become official law that any Iraq girls can be married at the age of 9. The Taliban has retaken Afghanistan and are making it their mission to disappear and erase women from both, I think, public and private spheres at this point, as though they can just disappear altogether and entirely, and a society can continue on. But somehow, in a place called Rojava, which is in part of Syria, for the past several years since ISIS was defeated, Islamic State, there has been, well, the opportunity for an incredibly liberated women's enclave in this part of Syria, not in isolation from their male counterparts, but a society has come up in which women are seen, treated, and behave as equal, full human beings within their society. And that is unique for the world, and it is definitely unique for the Middle East. And so we're going to talk about what is Rojava, who are the women of Rojava, what's happening there today, and how this sort of miraculous evolution of a society within the Middle East, within a minority within a minority, has contributed to an egalitarian society and the current threats to that, and how we need to be paying attention to that, and if there's something that we can do. So Ava is our expert witness, expert human being who's going to talk about that. So before we get started, Ava, I want people to understand who you are as a person, where you come from, your connection to Kurdish people and Kurdish identity. So please go ahead.
Hi, Heidi. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me. It's such an honor to be on the advisory board of the Women's Voices Now and to know you as a person and the work you have done about Kurdish women and through films and everything that you're doing. So I was born and raised in the Kurdish region of Iran, educated there, and I was in my 20s when I left to continue my education in Canada. But all of my writing has been focused on Kurdish experience. My first book, Echoes from the Other Land, was a collection of short stories, and then I spent another 9 years on working on a novel, Daughters of Smoke and Fire. And for the past 5 years, I've also been working on my third book, which focuses on women in Rojava as well as the Yazidi women's experience. So it's quite harsh to be a Kurdish woman in this world, to be constantly attacked and erased for being stateless, not having a country in the age of nation state, for being a woman in this harsh patriarchal world. And then when Rojava emerged, when this group of women emerged and they started fighting on two fronts at the same time, that was the first time when I felt a lot of hope and pride as a Kurdish woman. And so being inspired by their what they have achieved and what their goals that they have been working toward and literally giving their lives for has been phenomenal in the world. Not just in the Middle East, not just decades ahead of its own region in Swana, but also in the whole world, in the sense that women become equal partners of the society that they're shaping. Um, and so they have been a source of fascination and inspiration for me because to have an idea is very different from applying it in the real world, in the human world, but also in the middle of the chaos, the heartbreak that has been Syria since 2011. It's been a very long time of a lot of world powers interfering in this country, a lot of millions of people losing their lives and their homes and getting scattered around the world. So, how can you, in the middle of so much heartbreak and uncertainty and chaos and power grabbing by regional government as well as Western governments, create an enclave in which you try to say, we're going to fight not just ISIS, not just other countries around us, but also work with our own culture and dismantle patriarchy within our own culture? That's ability takes a lot of understanding and insight, and it takes a lot of courage, because it's easier to fight external sources than fighting your own culture and your own upbringing and all of that. Having said that, I have to mention, sorry, just this, there's this misunderstanding that the idea of gender equality is a Western product. And it's only been examined here and came up here, which is not true. When you look at the history of Kurdish women, you know that they have been rulers and governors since the 16th to 17th century. That doesn't mean the type of gender equality that was present at that time matches our ideals of equality now. It was centuries ago. But it is important to know that Kurdish women don't have to look into Western culture to introduce and bring in feminism and gender equality. It's very easy for them to look at their own culture and their own history and bring up a time when men had no problem obeying powerful Kurdish women, to understand that despite the effects of religion and patriarchy, it's possible for us to go back to our own roots.
Absolutely. So before we continue and talk a little bit more about the geopolitics to really position people in understanding where we're talking about, I want to go back again to you, Ava Homa, and who you are. And for many people, Kurds, this is not something that people do not know about the Kurdish people, that they're scattered between what is today the corners of Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Turkey. And for many people, the awareness of Iran, Kurds from Iran came about with the outbreak of, well, with the murder of Masa Jina Amini, who was also a Kurd from Iran who was killed by the morality police, or however she ended, how her life came to an end, that sparked the women life freedom movement in Iran in September 2022. And that most people really don't know that that slogan of women life freedom, which was translated into Farsi, is actually a Kurdish slogan for women life and freedom, Jinjian Azadi. And I feel that it's really important for people to understand that they're screaming this around the world, or they were for a while. People were very excited about it. And paying attention to what's happening in Iran, which does need to be paid attention to. But as someone who's studied the struggles and triumphs of Kurdish women, I feel it's so important that really people understand that it hasn't been a miracle. The hard work, like you said, looking within at the shortcomings of our own society is the most difficult work. It's airing the dirty laundry. And in societies that have a strong honor code, which Kurdish society is one of them, to do that it's almost impossible. And it is such an inspiration that this movement of women life freedom really came from the Kurds themselves, from Kurdish women. And it's a complicated history too, right? Because if it stemmed from the the Kurdistan Workers' Party, which is classified as a terrorist organization by the US and the European Union, there's so much work that we have to do to even understand where this movement came from. And I'm trying to think of what my question is. There's so much to talk about, right? But what I want to ask you is, what does it mean to you to be a Kurdish woman? What is that like? How does that look? What are the challenges to your being able to be your full self when you were growing up in Iran as a woman, as a Kurd, in those intersecting identities? And then were you aware of this concept of women life freedom coming from the Kurdish freedom movement, and how did that kind of shape who you are?
Yeah, definitely fighting misinformation. There is either what oppressors do is they either deny you or define you. So to label a stateless group, a defenseless group of people, as a threat is really a cruel and hypocritical thing to do when these people are fighting state terrorism. Why is that state terrorism is accepted and allowed and encouraged by a government like the US just because this state is their ally and friend, whereas fighting back and resistance is called terrorism? This misnomer is such a big injustice done to a group of people who have been fighting ISIS. How can you call a group of people who lost 13,000 lives to fight ISIS terrorists and to fight, also call them terrorists? If they are a terrorist, of course, who defeated ISIS, the most vicious forces of our world, if they are terrorists, why is US working with them to defeat ISIS? So there is
Complicated.
so much that shows the hypocrisy of the United States by capitulating to Turkey all the time. To your point about Iranian women and the little attention that they got in the Western media, it's not just because Iranian women are amazing in fighting back patriarchy. It's also because Iran is an adversary of the United States. Therefore, women's rights against that adversary is highlighted, whereas Kurdish women's right that has been as long as a century. It started in 1912 in Istanbul. Is the same as their sister movement, Iranian movement, women's movement didn't start in 22. It has been a 1 century long movement, the same as Kurdish movement. Why does one get some attention and the other one gets none? It really has to do with who they're fighting.
Mhm.
Kevin McKiernan, who lives in um, Santa Barbara, one of the most amazing American journalists, created a documentary called Good Kurds, Bad Kurds. And in it, again, he refers to US hypocrisy, talking about, okay, so the group of Kurds who live in Iraq on the mountain, having a guerrilla fight against Iraqi government, are lifted as freedom fighters in the US media, whereas especially right before US invasion of Iraq, the tragedies of the Kurds became an obsession for the US media 15 years after the genocide of the Iraqi Kurds.
Mhm.
The Western world suddenly heard about this genocide. Why didn't you hear about it 15 years ago? So I'm just trying to talk about, and the same Kurds on the same mountains fighting for the same rights and equality against Turkey. They're
Mhm.
labeled as terrorists. So US has been constantly hypocritical and capitulating to Turkey, even though US has very well been aware of the situation of human rights in Turkey. But they need to use Turkey's base, and Turkey is a NATO member, and Turkey is a NATO ally. So this has been their own duplicity and hypocrisy. And with the same thing with Kurdish life freedom movement, um, if you look up Google and say, where does this sentence come from? A nation won't be free until its women are. It's
Mhm.
attributed to Nelson Mandela.
Mhm.
Whereas that was a sentence that came from the jailed leader of the PKK, Öcalan. He had this realization and started talking about, well, Kurdistan won't be free until women are, right? And
Mhm.
yes, Öcalan is in a jail, has been in a jail for isolated on an island for decades. Um, and he is actually the person who created this Xinjiang, which later became Xinjiang Azadi. So what I'm trying to say is the situation is extremely complex, right?
Yeah.
But what I would love to focus on for our audience today is just instead of the complicated head buzzing geopolitics, which is almost impossible to digest in a short interview, is to look at what women have done over there, what their challenges has been, and how the media has responded to their efforts so far.
Absolutely. So let's get into it. Put us on the map. Where is Rojava and how have women taken the situation into their own hands and created a society where they are on equal footing with all other members of society?
So Rojava is the Kurdish word for West. One way Kurds fight colonialism is instead of saying Iranian Kurdistan, Turkish Kurdistan, they say Western Kurdistan, Northern Kurdistan, just to acknowledge that um, this was delineated in pre-World War atlases as Kurdistan. This was an ancestral land of the Kurds, and it was colonial powers that came and divided it up, and then we found ourselves at the mercy of four brutal governments, and that has been 100 years of suffering for us. So that's what Rojava means. It means west, and it refers really to north and northeast of Syria. And it has three cantons over there that Kurds have lived there. They were under the brutal regime of Assad family for 45 years. And the human rights abuse has been um, abundant in Syrian Kurdistan and Rojava, including not allowing Kurds access to their mother tongue, not taking away citizenship from a lot of Kurds in that part of the world. And gosh, it's one thing to be stateless, but at least I had a passport that said I was born in Iran. I had an identity that I could use in order to, come to the North America and start a life here. But imagine these people who were taken their citizenship from, so they were citizens of nowhere
Hmm.
in northern Syria. So that's just to offer a glimpse into what Kurds in Syria have suffered.
Hmm.
They're obviously close relatives, and just like Native Americans here, when they come and say, oh, suddenly this is Turkey, this is Syria, that's people living on the other side of your grandparents and cousin, and now they're suddenly from another country. You're from, it just makes no sense. And then they came and stripped citizenship and all of that. So they're both Kurds in Rojava and Bakur, even despite the line that said the man-made random arbitrary border that called them Syria and Turkey, they have been really close and they live on the border and they exchange trade and they speak the same language and have the same history and are oppressed for the same reason, right?
Hmm.
Which
Hmm.
unites people. Like Heidi, you and I come from different cultures, but being a woman connects us in so many ways, right? Same thing with people. If you're targeted for being Kurdish constantly, it creates a sense of solidarity that goes very deep, even if you're not related by blood to these
Hmm.
people.
Hmm.
So then, when Assad was weakened, this was given an opportunity to Kurds to say, okay, now we can practice our own values. And a lot of those values came from what Kurds in Bakur have been trying to do, which is making sure the heads of uh, every organization, like the mayor or an NGO, has one man, one woman as running that organization. Now, that doesn't mean people immediately see the woman and the man as equal or treat them the same way, but it's a good start. It's
Yes.
a good start to for children to grow up with seeing both men and women in the city. So really working for the next generation and creating
Yeah.
that idea. What happened was that was really historical in 2014. In 2014, ISIS, that had emerged in 2011, was really at the height of its power. It seemed really invincible at the time. It started expanding territory. They completely crossed the border between Iraq and Syria, and they took over Mosul, Iraq's second largest city. They took over they had their caliphate and expanding, and that's when they also enslaved Yazidi women, and just they seemed unstoppable to
Right.
the point that Iraqi soldiers would just leave heavy US weaponry to them and run away. At this point, they came and occupied Kobani. Kobani is a small city in North Syria, and ISIS started attacking Kurds on three fronts. And then Turkey closed its border on the
Hmm.
Kurds, right? A lot of people ran away, but some stayed. From 40,000 people who lived in Kobani, some of them stayed and they fought back.
Yeah.
And when that happened, the world started making fun of them. And I'm speaking specifically about Turkish President Erdogan, that they're going to be, slaughtered in no
Hmm.
time.
Hmm.
And Obama was in the office in the US at the time, and he didn't want to get involved in the Syrian mess. And the world was just watching with amazement that these people with like Kalashnikovs and like having nothing, fighting against heavy weaponry of these seasoned fighters of ISIS that had been joined ISIS from around the world, including from a lot of European countries. And everyone thought Kurds are going to be defeated. And it was such an amazing moment when a small group of people who defended their own land and their own families with love were able to resist these monsters with all their power and all their support. And that was the moment when Europeans decided, okay, this ISIS is going to be a threat for all of us, because ISIS officially announced that we're not going to stop in this area. We're going to go to Europe and we're going
Mhm.
to take Sharia law there. And so anti-ISIS coalition was started, and they offered airstrikes, and the ground troops were Kurds, and they defeated ISIS. And that really changed history. In early 2015, January 2015, ISIS received its first ever defeat. And that was when the world turned around and said, wait a minute, what just happened? And that's when US media, not so much US media, really mostly European and Australian media, started saying, who are these women who are not, because Western mentality can be very homogenous of Middle East, that everyone is ISIS, or every woman is an oppressed woman,
Yeah.
and they saw these women alongside other men, but having their own militia fighting ISIS. And that's when a lot of episodes were created about this woman, as if these women emerged out of nowhere. None of these sources acknowledge that these women have been fighting for a whole century and
Right.
have
So
been fighting.
just to pause for a moment. So what was astonishing, what many people did not know until 2014 in the fight for Kobani, unless you were paying attention to this part of the world, is that fighting alongside or in their own units actually against ISIS were troops of women. And of course, they didn't just learn how to be fighters when ISIS appeared. This was a multi-decade process of giving women the capacity and the skills and the know-how to defend themselves, not only of mind and spirit, but physically as well. And
Women giving themselves.
yeah,
So it was
yes,
other women that,
yeah,
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 fought for that. Yeah.
yeah,
No one
yes.
else
So
gave it to them.
right. So that I just think I know that that's something that people won't understand that
Yeah.
it I would feel it'd be safe to conjecture that the strength of the Kurds in that fight against ISIS was that it was really the entire society fighting against this enemy, men and women united for their survival. And that's something that is also
Old
very
and
unique
young.
in the Middle East, except for maybe Israel, where there are women fighting in the army as well, defending their
Yeah.
people. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, even older women, anyone who was willing to protect their own home where it was given a Kalashnikov. And they
Yes.
would obviously lose a lot of their comrades and their family members. And they would start celebrating these lives as opposed to being oppressed by it. And so there was a lot of, like I said, inner battle as well. And what's amazing is they also started in these bomb shelters, starting school. And for the first time, teaching children their mother tongue, and the slogan for them was, imagine this kind of dangerous life was constantly resistance. Resistance
Mhm.
is life. Bar khodan jiana. Resistance is life. Resistance is life. So you see small children for the first time learning to read and write in
Yeah.
their own language. And
Yeah.
so to remember that, to know that you're not just fighting for the land, you're fighting for an identity is quite remarkable.
Yes. So what's unique about this, so let's get more into Rojava. So in the power vacuum, so there's the Syrian civil war in 2011, which gives oxygen to ISIS to really try to establish its caliphate. The Kurds managed to push back ISIS and defeat them. So there's no Syrian power and authority in Rojava. There's no ISIS authority in Rojava. So there's a power vacuum which the Kurds fill with their own way of living and being. So quite often in liberation movements, women may be involved in the fighting, right? But then when the fighting's done, they go back to the homes and they're having the
Exactly.
children, etc. This is not the case in Rojava. So when the fighting stopped and there was relative security. Tell us about sort of the mechanisms within Rojava where women are showing up as human beings, as leaders, as teachers, as all, what are the different roles that they're playing that is different from other places in the Middle East?
Right. So Kobani is part of Rojava, and that really empowered other women in Rojava to start this revolutionary, really revolutionary radical movement. And they had three pillars. Jin Jiyan Azadi, women life freedom, means they fought for justice for humans and land. So they had three goals. One was to find autonomy for the farmers, to connect back with the land, to um, take care of ecological sustainability. That was one of the pillars. The other one was gender equality, and they started saying that, and this was really emerged and married to the idea of confederalist democracy. And that's what it is democratic confederalism, and which is a bottom top kind of democracy, that instead of people on top deciding for people in the villages what you need and this is what we're going to do, they started asking people to gather in council and say, what do you want from your leaders to do for you? And they
Mhm.
started saying that this council won't take shape until at least 50% of it are women. So these women that have been pushed to the margin and say, your job is to serve and nothing else, were asked to come sit in this council and say, what do you need? You know,
Mhm.
what
Mhm.
do you need to have in order to feel safe and in order to protect your family and in order to be part of the economy and the politics and the social aspect of your society?
Mhm.
And there have been challenges. For example, one of the things that Rojava women wanted to do was to ban polygamy and child marriage, right? But changing mind takes time. So
Mhm.
if you have this bottom top, you can impose these ideas on people. How do you change mind when people are afraid of change, where
Yeah.
people are comfortable in the status quo? How much patience, how much education
Yeah.
does that require? So education became really important for these people. And the other thing that I really love about this group is that they also went beyond ethnic differences and ethnic hostilities
Right.
that have deep roots in the society. So they started overcoming those by opening it to men and women of Turkmen, Arab, Azeri, Yazidi, and everyone, and say we're past that age where ethnicity defined us. We're in this together, and we'll find common grounds, and we're finding safety in the middle of this chaos. So to this day, even though it is Kurdish led and even though it was founded by Kurds, even the name has changed to the Democratic Society of North and East Syria, just to
Mhm.
create that inclusion and equality,
I didn't know that.
which has been
Wonderful.
another remarkable thing that they have done. SDF is very diverse.
That is
And
remarkable.
yeah.
So I just want to point out again the uniqueness of this region where so throughout the Middle East, women are doctors, lawyers, engineers, professors, teachers, mothers, scholar, all the different things. Women
Yeah.
playing these roles throughout the Middle East. It's not that all women in the Middle East are, confined to the home. This is not what we're saying. But what's unique about Rojava is that it goes beyond to the culture, right? To these things that are so difficult. So what happens inside the house? Like you said, there's trying to stop polygamy, child marriages, I imagine honor killings as well. Like, how do you really get into these cultural traditions that can be changed because humans create culture? Culture does not come from anywhere else but human beings practicing it. So how do you change people's practices? So that's what's that I and that's the women's rights issue of the world, right? Like all over the world, women have more and more equality on paper, in law, in education, in political participation, but violence against women never reduces, right? And
Yes.
this is also why it's incredible that this particular society is really tackling exactly the thing that never seems to change. And so I think it's really important that the world is looking at this example. And so I would love, what do you know about how have those cultural practices changed, shifted? What is working, what isn't, what progress have they made toward women really feeling from the inside out safe, secure, and respected in society?
So there's a lot of emphasis on education. There's a lot of emphasis on patience and clarifying that these are not imported ideas. These are part of your own history and your culture, and they are indigenous to
Mhm.
you and who you've been. And even though, things have changed over time, because like look at the spectrum that the Kurdish women are, right? Sure, on one hand you see, honor killing and uh, FGM, female genital mutilation, and all of that. But on the other hand, you see FHA, and the world usually likes to say, okay, so who are Kurdish women? Are these oppressed, voiceless women, or are these liberated, empowered women? And the truth is everything, all of it. It's not
Mhm.
either or. It's this entire spectrum. And it is this group of women who save and help and offer sisterhood to the other group of women.
Right.
So when ISIS emerged, who were ISIS slaves? Yazidi women who are also Kurdish. And who saved this Yazidi woman? Other Kurdish women.
Mhm.
So it's important to remember the idea of both. It doesn't have
Mhm.
to be one or the other. And
Right.
so this education, and that education and patience is so important, as opposed to imposing and having conversations And so this has been remarkable and it's been going on, but it has not been peaceful because Turkey, that is terrified, really, and completely terrified by what Kurds have built. I mean, it was such a blow to Turkey when US realized that, okay, I can't work with any other group in Syria against Bashar Assad. Especially because at the time Iran and Russia also started supporting Bashar al-Assad, the former president. And so it was important for US's own interest to get involved in the region and for them to see, okay, the only people we can work with is Kurds. And I want to be clear that while SNA, that's the Islamic group that are backed by Turkey, have attacked Kurds with a lot of impunity, have all this support. The US has not been really supporting the Kurds in this battle.
Mhm.
So it's just they use the Kurds for their own interest and then they step back and they have caused more damage than actually support for the
Mhm.
Kurds.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so since they in 2018, shortly after Kurds defeated ISIS, Turkey came in and annexed Afrin
Mhm.
against all international law. I mean, Turkey has been very clear about its Ottoman ambitions to go back to,
Yes.
what they think they were and break all the international laws. And again in 2019. So everything that Kurds have been building, Turkey has been constantly attacking, nonstop. But the attacks have increased since Bashar Assad was toppled
Mhm.
and escaped to Russia. And so the world turned and looked at this new government in Syria and said, okay, what are you doing? What does this mean? It's really good news that this dictator is not there, but who are you and what are you trying to achieve? And the leader of Hay'at Tahrir al-Sham, HSD, HTS started saying that, oh, well, yes, we did used to belong to Daesh and ISIS, and we were an Al-Qaeda offshoot, but we're not that radical anymore. And while the world was focused on that, Turkey and its mercenaries that have been accused by a lot of international human rights organizations, including Amnesty International, for their war crime, started looting and attacking. And they don't just attack people, they also attack the environment. They attack against the dams, the water sources for people, all the efforts to have to work with the land and farm is also another thing that Turkey stops. So Turkey has been relentless in its attempt to expand its power and annex Syria and has been taking advantage of its hostility against Kurds to justify its own action. And shamelessly, US and Europe has just been standing and looking and say, okay, without trying to interfere. But what is important is for people like you and I and your audience, people who care about human rights, to say, okay, my media is failing me. Really, American media is failing us. And if it wasn't for racism, Rojava experiment should have been studied and examined and looked at throughout the world to say, is humanity capable of that? Is this
Mhm.
something that humanity can do? What are the challenges? How can feminists around the world support this, but it's been completely erased and completely silenced, and Kurds have been left alone and constantly betrayed. And this right now is a very important moment in history,
Yes.
and which is why you and I are having this conversation to raise this awareness and say to people, do not let your media to fail you. This is happening. Do not lose hope in what humanity can do, what women can achieve. And please take a look at books that have been written about Rojava. It's not something that quickly comes up on Google. It's not something the New York Times unfortunately covers, but it's possible to educate ourselves and then to call our representative and say, do not support Turkish aggression. I want to learn more about these women, and I don't want them to lose what they have fought for over a decade.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. I agree. So so what's at stake here is that if HTS becomes the accepted leader of Syria and makes an attempt to reunify Syria as it was under Bashar al-Assad, what what will happen to Rojava? What will happen to northeastern Syria, to this region, this de facto autonomous region that has created an egalitarian society that is not only from the top down showing gender equality, but from the bottom up working with the society to evolve itself to something that I don't even know, really exists anywhere else. Like it's so,
Exactly. It
I mean, as a
doesn't.
woman, I've never been invited to a committee, to a council to discuss, how can we really tackle domestic violence? How can we really, address rape culture? Like this is not something that the government involves the people. There's politicians who run on a platform that they're going to change this, that, and the other, and then the statistics don't change. So again, there's something so unique and outstanding, extraordinary happening in this part of Kurdistan that is underappreciated. And like you mentioned, it is a model that could be repeated, but we don't even have enough curiosity about it to understand how this came about and who are these women and men who are trying to build a completely unique society to the rest of the world. So what's at stake here if we aren't asking our elected officials to be very cautious about HTS, if we're not asking, well, what is happening in that region of Kurdistan next to Turkey? And, yes, what's at stake here?
Okay, so unfortunately, Rojava's revolutionary model is both a blessing and a curse. It threatens colonial power as much as it threatens the aggressive states around it. And so this is why we can't really depend on the government, and we really need to rely on each other on independent platform and journalism and work in order to be able to know that what is this model that is happening, what has worked, what hasn't, how can we bring it to the rest of the world, what can we learn from their experience, and so on and so forth. Because really, Heidi, this is unique in the whole world. This is not just unique in the region.
Mhm.
And what's at stake here is, unfortunately, Hay'at Tahrir al-Sham STAs is backed by Turkey. And so therefore they are very much under influence of what Turkey imposes on them. And Turkey is very clear on how aggressive and how ruthless and hostile they are to anything Kurdish, especially as Kurds gain popularity in the world for being such progressive people. Um, and worse than HTS, though, is really official Turkish gangsters, SNA, which
Mhm.
is another extremely Islamist group that have been attacking um, uh, North and East Syria. So the ambition for this multi-ethnic group, this Syrian democratic government in North and East Syria, is not independence. They're hoping to live within a democratic government that allows them to continue maintaining their value of gender equality, ecological sustainability, and democratic and federalism. And but the threat is that both HTS and SNA are really hostile to minorities and to women. And even though HTS in Damascus has been saying that, oh, we have changed, we're not that bad, they have so far really failed to be inclusive of minorities and show any respect for women as humans in any way. SNA is officially another Taliban. And so they have been raping women. They've done a lot of atrocities. You can look up Amnesty International to look at their war crime and see what they have done to environment and to the women. And I always think about the connection between how people treat their environment and their women, you know,
Mhm.
taking
Mhm.
them for granted, attacking them, abusing them, and all of that. And so this is an important moment in the history. And if we don't do what we can, both calling our representative, even though they don't the empowerment policies is not for us, but they need our vote, and so they do pay attention to the calls and
Mhm.
phone emails that
Yeah.
goes into their office,
Yeah.
but also really educating ourselves about is humanity capable of that, especially in this grim time when
Yeah.
it looks like the world is going to more and more darkness and more women in America are losing their bodily autonomy. How is this that in a small part of the world this experiment is happening and I
Mhm.
don't hear about it and I don't know about it? It's not perfect, it's not utopia, but it's definitely worth our attention.
Yes, and it's an intentional society trying to make change in really thoughtful, innovative, and sort of unprecedented ways. I insist it is unprecedented. That was what really drew me to the story of Kurdish women, was just sort of this very, very specific, in-depth, brutally honest ability to look at one's own society and understand that if women are not respected and encouraged to fulfill their full potential, then the entire society never will. And that is the most important lesson, I think, for the entire world. And all societies are still working toward that. And again, when there's so many reasons, historical, economic, social, cultural reasons that a society wouldn't do that and that they are anyway, it is one of like I take so much inspiration and so much hope from when I am paying attention to what's happening for the women of Kurdistan. Like it really is something, if anything, like it's just to keep you going, right? To keep doing, to keep believing that we can be our better selves. And right now, like you said, we really need to find little glimmers of hope when it feels like darkness is really gaining traction and taking up a lot of space.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So Ava, is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience? You've encouraged us to call and write to our elected officials just to put this story on their radar and that it is important and that we know that the United States, its support or lack thereof of the people of Rojava will make a difference in their ability to survive. That's one recommendation you made. If there's anyone who is a journalist or a student who's writing a paper to do some research about the Kurdish women's movement in all of its iterations, and especially in northeastern Syria and or Rojava. I think what's important that you've also mentioned, Ava, is that it's not just a Kurdish freedom movement in Rojava. It is everyone, all the
Yeah.
different ethnic and religious minorities that are living there, which again, very unique for the Middle East, where there's this idea that there would be strength in our diversity, not a threat from our diversity. That's a very unique aspect of this movement as well. Anything else that you would like to impart upon our listeners and viewers?
I want to appreciate your time and the time of the viewers to open themselves to something that they don't often hear about. And I want to say there are three ways that you can help. There is a very good website called defendrojava.org, and it's a US-based group that are lobbying for um, Rojava. It's not lobbying in the sense that they don't, it's a group of volunteers. It's a group of journalists and women who have been, men and women who have been aware of this unfolding for a long time, and therefore they have a lot of resources that are helpful to you. So defendrojava.org gives you the script when you decide who to call. Some of the senators have been working with these groups that you can get their names and know who they are. If you would like more information about Rojava women and what they have achieved and want, you can read books about them. Meredith Tax is another US journalist who passed away, unfortunately, but she wrote about this fight for the nation website for several years. So Meredith Tax, Debbie Bookchin is another award-winning journalist who has been writing on this. And you can find all of that on defendrojava.org. You can educate yourself, you can donate to their campaign, you can get a script to calling your representative, and just know that a few minutes of your time can really make a difference because as difficult as it is to be in America today, there are a lot of privileges that come with it, right? And that's your ability to call your representative and make a difference. At least we don't know what's going to come out of our action, but at least we can know that we did what we could. So defendrojava.org.
Thank you, Ava. And I would also like to encourage everyone who listens to this to go to avahoma.com to learn more about you and to definitely read Daughters of Smoke and Fire and to look for all of your writings and all of the different ways that they have come into the world that we can understand how your mind is working and the stories that you have to tell and learn from them. And I really look forward to your next novel, and I hope we get to talk about that in a future conversation too.
Thank you, Heidi. Thanks to you, and thanks to Women's Voices Now.
Thank you, Ava.